Mixter was awarded for 20 years of maritime preservation by the Association of Great Lakes Maritime History. He has produced over 30 shows on local history for PBS and the Outdoor Channel and has prepared the History and Discovery Channel as a shipwreck expert. He is also an award-winning news reporter with TV5, working for stations all across Michigan. He holds several certifications in scuba, including advanced ratings in ice rescue, and he created Airworthy Productions in 2000, and continues to produce industrial and fundraiser videos full-time as a videographer. Ric is also a private pilot and has flight time in several vintage warbirds. He was aboard the final B-52 flights from Michigan and also chronicled the Tuskegee Airmen in the Great Lakes State, as well as our famous Rosie the Riveters at Willow Run in Ypsilanti. So without further ado, I'm going to have Ric come forward.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Sam. He forgot my biggest accolade, though. That's Grandpa. I can't even mess that up. Holy cow, all you got to do is... Absolutely love it. I got two little toddlers around the house, and Grandma was supposed to take care of them today. She was going to be here today, but one got the flu, so man, it just kind of like, you know, comes and goes. But daycares tend to do that, don't they? I spent my summer because I had so much extra time on my hands. I thought, you know what, why don't I try to do some of the projects I've always wanted to do? And being a board member at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society up at Whitefish Point, it was important for me to try to get some time on the boat. And you know, the joke is you go out there and you mow the grass, meaning we take the tow fish and we go back and forth for hundreds of miles, and hoping that the fish will find shipwrecks that are down there, especially as you get up into the shipping lanes. And because we have better technology that can go down to 600–700 feet, that's even deeper than the Fitzgerald, the robot can go down that deep. So we're starting now to search in areas that have never been searched before. So we got lucky, and the joke became that every time I came up, they found a shipwreck, which was great. But the truth was that Daryl, the guy that's in charge of our marine operations, had just the magic luck this year. Technology worked out. The lake was so flat so often, Lake Superior, so when you're way out there, that he found so many shipwrecks. The joke is he was going to make a calendar. The latest count is at least 12 shipwrecks that he's found. And much to my surprise, and probably not to yours, because you know how prolific the shipyards here are, many of them are from Bay City. The joke was, and I've done a complete talk before we even found the schooner and the steamers, that there's so many sunk, you know, maybe because they weren't building them right here, and that's not true. Hundreds of hulls were built here, many across the lake. We'll talk about Davidson today. Many across where now Wheeler's Landing is, very close to there. The largest vessels on the Great Lakes came out of these shipyards. The largest wooden in the world came out of Davidson. So it's not surprising that we're going to find these vessels, but to find them up off of Whitefish and to find so many of them, it really became significant for us. So that's how I spent my summer of shipwrecks. I called up a buddy of mine, Brendan Baylod, who does a lot of research. He's from the Keweenaw Peninsula, so a fellow Youper like me and Mick. How many other Youpers are in the crowd today? There we go. Hi, welcome. Good. Well, Ironwood, fantastic, eh? So let's talk about the Wheeler Shipyard. And let's just, if we look kitty corner, you know, going down to by Wheeler's Landing, this is where this massive shipyard was. And since 1876, really is where Franklin Wheeler was actually building these. And as he went into, within 20 years, he was building massive steel vessels, which some of the best on the lakes. And when this one came out, the city of Bangor, it was actually built for a company that's actually here as well. So Eddy Brothers had a massive lumber yard. That's right when you cross over the Independence Bridge. If you look between there and literally the sewage treatment plant, the water treatment plant there, that was a huge yard, and the Eddy brothers made millions of dollars there. So that's the yards that we're talking about here. So this was built for the Eddy brothers. They already had a vessel called the Penobscot, and if you're hearing kind of a background on the name Penobscot and City of Bangor, the guys were from Maine, so that's why they kept these names of these ships that most people go, what? That doesn't make sense. Why would you call it that? That was why they did it. So here we are, May 1896, splashing into the Saginaw River. And it says down there, Eddy Brothers and Shaw's, one of their partners they had at the time, new vessel, the City of Bangor, was launched at the Wheeler and Company shipyard. pretty big splash into the river for sure. Now, they had a long career. They decided that they needed to lengthen it, so they brought it down to Chicago. Amship actually did the lengthening of 72 feet, 1905. And later on, it was bought up by the Nichols Transit Company. And if you look, this isn't a picture of the Bangor, but it's another one similar. Nicholson was involved in moving automobiles on the Great Lakes. So the problem is with a bulk freighter that are designed for cargo to be dumped into the hatches, that's not a great way to call cars, right? How do you get cars on board? So they put an elevator on top of the ships to allow them to bring these vehicles on board. And they put a lot on board. This is one of the bigger vessels. You can see their logo right here, looks like a steering wheel, Nichols Transit. And these are all 1925 era, 1926 era Chryslers and other vehicles going on board. And they bring them up to the elevator and fill it up. And look at this. The deck on the city of Bangor is just jam-packed. Here's the elevator right here. And look at all the cars that are all lined up in there. And look at the records. In 1925, boatload of more than 500 Willys Night cars. So they're loading this thing to the brink with these vessels. And of course, for the cost of doing a ship, you can move, grain, you can move ore, vehicles so much cheaper than you can over even the railroad. It's just the less friction on the water, the amount of fuel burned by these, they couldn't match them. For years though, that would be the way to move these things around until the highway system obviously came in and kind of corrected that. But the problem is, what do you have when you go on the Great Lakes? Storms. So they do get caught in big storms, and it happened a couple of times to the big vessels of Nicholson, and city of Bangor fetched up way up here on the Keweenaw. Now, if you know the Keweenaw Peninsula, you know that you do have, Fort Wilkins up here, but most of the civilization's over here, and then especially if you get down by Houghton Hancock. So this might as well be Mars. It's out there, and even today, there's not a road to get out to this. There's trails to get out here. And the story of the city of Bangor going aground is November 30th, 1926, and it crashed ashore, and the crew were pretty much stranded there. So they said, well, we got to walk for ourselves. And they went ashore and walked around and got lost in a swamp here and then came back. Well, luckily, I guess not so lucky for the Maytham, but another ship got stranded over here. So the lifesavers came out around to here, didn't even see the city of Bangor, picked up these guys and came back, and as soon as they came by, saw the bonfire and saw the big ship that was actually there. And I'll show you what the ship looked like. You'll be amazed that they missed it, but in a big blizzard, it was a trick. So they told them, stay where you're at, we'll come back and get you. So they went all the way back and dumped them off and then came back. This is what it looked like up on the beach. So big ice coming in, and again, here's that steering wheel of Nicholson. And this would have been loaded up with cars, so we know this is after it was actually evacuated. So 200 cars are on board. The captain said he lost steerage, and as they did, the vessels were falling off into the water. And one of the interviews that I actually have in a podcast, I'll show you an address you can go to listen to it for free. He says that they watched them go overboard, and when they found them on the beach, they were just balls. So the cars got ground up by the pressure of the waves and the rolling action of the waves, and were just rubber and steel balls laying on the beach. So some of them got completely destroyed, but some of them just dropped right off. So there's a dozen of these cars out there somewhere. Well, a big story goes, and it was a great story from the oiler that we have there. Hartway says he was walking through the woods, and it turns out because it was late season, it was November, they had 4 captains on board. 3 of them were actually just hitching a ride. So they were taking their ride back. They get stranded, and they get off the ship. They take the lifeboat ashore, and they basically throw a line to shore and then just ferry everybody back. And as they start walking through the snow, the captains expect the crew to carry their luggage. So this lasted until the snow up there is 22 feet deep normally, So here they are trying to go through with waist deep snow, and they drop the luggage, and the captain goes, pick it up, I'm the captain. And the guy looked at him and said, you're not the captain on land, sir. So they left all of their luggage in the woods. And they actually have at the museum the captain's outfit. So my guess is the locals probably followed their tracks back through the snow and collected up all the luggage that was actually left on the wilderness of the Keweenaw. They could hear, as they had their fire going, the wolves howling in the background. Can you imagine how sobering that would be? It's a blizzard out, you're hearing wolves, and finally you see the lifesavers come by and they said, hey, we'll be back to pick you up. And they got an easier ride in. This is what the cars look like on deck, all frozen up. 200 on board, so that's $250,000 in 1926 of vehicles. And they said, we got to get them off of there. So they built a giant snow ramp up the side and they drove them down. The problem was not every one of these vessels or vehicles had batteries on board. So they had to borrow a battery to start one and then run it down. One of the stories is the local Youper were getting paid $5 a car, and they would go into the woods and hide a car and then come back and get another one. So these were supposed to go to Calumet. They made it to the to one of the bays there, and then when they finally could build a bridge along the ice, they kind of followed the shoreline back with them. They said one of the cars disappeared, and it's always been the folklore up there that that's where it was. So they chop them out of the ice and bring them out and drive them down. It was ironic to me that they were actually switching out batteries, because aren't we having that problem right now with our new cars? We don't have chips in them. So when I drove by Flint the other day, I could see them all lined up, you know, all these vehicles that couldn't be sold. It seems just like this. So here's, you know, 70 odd cars right now being loaded off onto this big road that will go eventually into Calumet, where they put them on a train and bring them back for rehab, because many of these vehicles needed some help after the ice damage that they had. The captain took the logbook of the boat and actually stuffed it underneath a log, and somebody found it. So this is the actual logbook of the city of Bangor that's at the museum. And there is entries up to the day of the storm, but nothing beyond that. So unfortunately, in the case of even 1913 storm, the captain was found sadly dead, but his diary was on him. You don't make entries when you're in a shipwreck. You know, you go, hey, hold on, let me make a little entry here. Dear diary, everything is bad. These guys, so the last entry is just basically loaded cars and came up from Detroit, and that's the last thing that was on there. So ironic that just within a couple, 2 years after that, another vessel fetched up within eyesight of where it was. And believe it or not, the Altidoc was actually built in Bay City too. So here's two Bay City built vessels. This one right here being the Altidoc was originally launched as the Lakeshore at Bay City. This is back when Amship bought Wheeler's Yard, so 1901. But it was bought by a company called Patterson, and Patterson would name all of their boats Doc at the end of it, DOC, for Dominion of Canada. So if you've heard of the Sorel Dock or the Nova Dock from the 1940 storm, they had 36 different vessels that they would name with Doc at the end of it. Altidoc being from the word Alberta, being the abbreviation is Alta, and then they put Doc at it. So that's where all these names came from. Some of them I can't even pronounce, like Quebec. I don't know if it's Quebec, like Quebec, or what, but some of them, it's very difficult to know what name they were going for, because you got to pull it apart. But it's pretty much the provinces of the area. So December 1927, this is when the Altidoc joined them. And take a look at that pilot house right there, because it's going to play a part in our story. And also the rocks that are here too. So it goes that these vessels are there, they're trying to get them salvaged, and storms come up and of course, you know, do more damage. It's not worth taking the ship anymore. But by World War II, they're starting to look at every shipwreck around, because they need the steel. They have to recycle. Remember, people were even recycling pantyhose during the war. If you had a steel vessel like this is a waste. So they hired the locals, many of them who were lumberjacks, who said, this isn't worth, I can get more doing steel. So they came up here through the wilderness, cut a road in there, even invented special cars that could go on the beach and yank these things apart. And they did. Piece by piece, they took them off. This is some footage of the city of Bangor on the beach after the cars were done. So this is probably the next spring or the spring after that. See, the big elevator is still there. It still looks in pretty good shape. Here's that steering wheel right there and the elevator. Look at this big rock right here. This is going to be something significant. Everybody's kind of known the area where the Bangor came ashore. It's always been folklore up there, even though there's not a trail that was easily to it. Now there's a pretty good trail that goes there, but look at the beach going through here, and here's the lifeboat number 1, still on the beach. I wish that was still there. I don't know where that might have gone to. Probably just abandoned or destroyed if it was left right there on the beach. But the vehicles are all gone, and now it's time for these things to start to get cut up. The Park Service found this for me, which is pretty amazing to know that this ship stuff existed. Not many pictures exist of the Altidoc, and the location of where that was, we could tell by one picture, but we never had an overview that showed 2 ships in the piece. So How do you find it? I called up Brendan and I said, you know what I'm going to do? Here's I'm scrapping it out. They cut it right to the water line and then used a bulldozer to pull. This is the Altidoc's bow, yanking it right out of the beach to turn it in for scrap. So they took pretty much every piece of this. But the question is, what about the cars that were washed overboard that might be out here? And what else is on the beach? I mean, I've never seen good photographic evidence of what was there. So this spring, I said, hey, how are the black flies doing? That's the #1 question you ask. And then you say, let's go up there and take a peek. So I went up there and I based it on not only the locality I'd seen on the other stuff, but the aerial pictures I found. This is what happened to the Altidoc's pilot house. A guy actually bought it up, an artist up there, and he cut off the top part of it and made it into a cabin and added a little bit, a 2-bedroom cabin and called it the world's smallest hotel and dragged it to Copper Harbor. So this is in a couple different magazines. This is in National Geographic, where it was big news, and everybody up north knew about this until 1987, and it burned down. So sadly, I don't know why it happened. I haven't found a news account for this, but it was March 22nd, and it got torched. And so this is built in Bay City, Michigan, one of the last parts of the Altidoc. And we decided, let's go take in a look for the Chryslers. If you know anything about the older cars, and I knew absolutely nothing about Chryslers, the number that they had here was based on the speed that it could do. So yeah, a Chrysler 50 could go 50, so the Chrysler 70 could go 70. So as they got bigger and they got into bigger cars, the 50 was kind of the affordable one that Chrysler believed would change the, sell the most. This is what they had the most of on board. There's never been a good accounting for the exact numbers, but everything that I can see was that it was a 50. And of course, there's that story that kept lingering that there was a car around, and that, lo and behold, you go up to the lighthouse and they had a 26 Chrysler sitting at the museum. And I'm like, oh, I want to go see this. So we decided we're going to not only go up there to take a look at that in the museum, but this is an aerial picture that University of Michigan came up with in 1938. So an airplane went flying over the top and showed me the city of Bangor and the Altidoc, all in one shot with that big rock that we talked about. So if you take the picture, which is actually 3 times this size, and lay it out against the contour of the peninsula and put it into Google Earth, I got coordinates for both. So we said, we're gonna hop in a boat and we're gonna go find this, because that's still there. It's gotta be the big rock, right? So here's the big rock, here's the film footage, here's the big rock today, and the bay. So this would be City of Bangor here, and then Altidoc would be over here. So we knew exactly where to go and start looking around. And sure as shoot, this was buried into the bank of the actual shoreline here. Everything else has been picked over. People have come back since 1926. People have come out to take something from the wreck. These are rivets that were pounded right across the river here. So think about that. In fact, I did. This is a really cool find. I mean, for all the little pieces we've been seeing on the beach, this is by far the biggest piece we've found, and it's got rivets still on it. And it's just amazing to think that this was built in Bay City, Michigan, and these were hammered by the folks at the West Bay City Shipyard. It's just amazing to know that the ship's gone, but this big piece still resides right here, and there's still vehicles out there someplace. Bugs were so bad, my legs were blood. I had bug bites on my legs for 4 weeks after this trip, and it's those no-see-ums. I hate those things. Now, I will fight those a lot more than the horse flies, though. The deer flies that will bite through your socks up there are so miserable. So these are not bad. You don't feel them until like 2 days later. 2 days later, I was taking an aspirin to control the pain from it, but it was totally worth it. We also found big chunks, just up the beach too from here, big chunks of cement with rebar in it. And it turns out either Nicholson or somebody actually changed it so that because they weren't carrying bulk cargo anymore, it wasn't floating right with all the cars that were up on the upper levels. So they poured concrete in the bottom. So when they blasted it out, that concrete is all over. So now it's up in the woods, it's all over the place. So we went into the lighthouse too, And I saw the car and I went, oh, that's a good clue. It has a 1927 license plate on it. It's supposed to be from 26. And I said, well, what else can we do? And I said, I can go into the engine room, or the engine compartment, and I can take a look at that. And that was scraped off. So dang it, I'm not going to get an easy one. But in the Chryslers, there's also a serial number inside them. And this is called the Fedco number. And this is right on the dash. And I told Brendan, I said, get your camera in here and give me a big fat picture of this, because I need to know W069C. And that's the code that you put in, and you go through the books and you find out that this was actually made in 27. So there's no way that, and the story goes it came from a dealer anyways, so I didn't think it was part of that. So we take a look at this, it didn't seem to match up, so kind of disappointed, and I didn't want to bust their bubble. So let's go to an earlier ship that came out of the same shipyard, F.W. Wheeler, and this is probably, this right here is the Nirvana, I believe, but it would be a very close sister ship to the F.W. Wheeler. Built at the yard, came out in 1884 in March, and this would be later called the Barth or the Wilhelm, and it was built out of a big partnership. Forgive me, the Forbes was the one that was towing it. The Forbes would be the one that was towing the barge around, because he had no power of their own. Many of the bigger ones that came out were just designed to be towed by steamers, and of course the Forbes and the Wheeler both came out of Wheeler's yard. Built for a guy out of Detroit, or out of Port Huron, a captain that had a very long career towing and as a captain as well, and made a pretty good fortune. His relatives, unfortunately, had a lot more problems with. One of the brothers disappeared, and when the Cyclops disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle, he was a skipper on that. So there's a lot of backstory on the Forbes family that I want to get into. This is Frank Wheeler. You probably didn't know he was in the House of Representatives. He ran one term and then got beat after it, but in 1888, he actually served for the Bay County area. Also was heavily involved from 1876, and then got a partner, was doing a lot of stuff with Crane. Then F.W. Wheeler's yard came in, then he sold out to Amship. And then when he came back after his term, he actually worked in Saginaw, and during World War I they were turning out vessels there out of the Saginaw shipyard too. So long career. This is the first steel vessel he ever built, called the Emily P. Weed, and it sank as a Savona in the 1905 storm, if you've seen my lectures on that. A fantastic steamer and real sharp. It's sad now, it's cut down just to the bottom. That's all you can really see out there on the Apostle Islands. Wheeler was honored with a steamer in his name, and unfortunately that sank too. This one went down off of Indiana, and this would be December of 1893. Luckily they were so close to shore, the crew were saved. It's now part of their little DNR park that's out there that has all those wrecks protected, but the F.W. Wheeler, the steamer, is down there. So you'd be so surprised as we're going dragging a towfish around. Turns out that me and our marine operations guy, Daryl, are huge into Star Trek, and this looks like a Klingon bird of prey. Now you know how much of a real nerd I am that I would know that, but it looks like one of the evil guys' spaceships on there, yeah. So as soon as he saw that, he goes, wow, that's got to be something. And sure enough, it's a filleted open ship. And that's what happens, unfortunately, with these vessels carrying iron ore or coal when they hit the bottom. The wooden vessels, especially going down 600 feet, they just disintegrate on the bottom. The story was, pretty devastating, that they going through, they tried to turn around, hoping that the storm was a bad call, and they tried to make it in the lee of the Grand Island out by Munising, and barely made it when the ship started to sink and went down. And the crew, luckily on this one, were actually taken off. And this is our underwater robot, some of the first footage taken of the Frank Wheeler. This is the bottom at about 600 feet, and you can see there's no zebra mussels on this at all. Lake Superior has been really kind to us, that it's so clear that the zebra mussels and the quagga mussels can't live that deep and can't survive in there. But look at this intact cabin on there, and this window that's still in there. And again, this was built just down the street. I mean, this literally, and look at the cook stove, tipped over the heating stove, forgive me, and a table and a bench. When you see this through the monitors as the robot is going through it, this shows you that this was a place where men worked. I mean, this is where men and ladies spent their lives. This is their home in many cases, because they'd spent so many months out there. So when you see a coal stove like this, it really kind of sinks home. So we've only got a couple of shots of this one. We're hoping to go back, but now that he's found 12 of them, you know, we're kind of like, how do you prioritize? You know what you usually do is you look at the length of them and you start to say, well, this could be this one. You know, the hope is that the big holy grail on Lake Superior right now are the French minesweepers, which nobody knows. You know, they were launched in Thunder Bay, they were brought down. 2 of them went missing in a big storm, and the hope is always as you get something under 300 feet that it might be one of those. And we haven't had any targets that are, you know, that close to it, but been really lucky. The problem is our days usually start out really nice, and I'll show you this out here. This is a typical beginning. This is the Boyd, the boat we're going to go out on, getting it ready. We go out, it's foggy, and it's so foggy we have to tell freighters where we're at because we've got robots down below, we can't move. So foggy and flat, which is amazing for scanning, it's amazing for doing your work, but coming back, this is what happens. Unforecasted 8-footers, and we're busting through them in a 50-foot vessel, which, you know, we're all just kind of like, yeah, this isn't too bad, but boy, it's sobering when you're trying to thread your way into the harbor. And as Matt knows, I'm no captain, so I just stand back and play cameraman for all of this, let them take care of it. But this is what you don't want to get caught out, and this is why so many boats, in especially Whitefish Point, until you get around that point, you're going to take on this stuff. And at some point, you've got to turn to get to the safety, and that's when you really put yourself to the sideways waves. You can't run bow into the wind, you know, forever. So that's what we had to deal with for one of the trips. I did get a text message from him, and he said, you got to take a look at this, Rick, and he sends it to me, and sure enough, the measurements are 180 feet long. And with the hatch arrangements right away, I'm like, oh, I think I know what this is. So I called him up and I said, when are you going to put the robot on there? And he told me, well, I'm going to get out there when I can. And the stinker did not call me when they were going out, but I wasn't surprised that my next text was going to be a schooner about this size. This is a Nirvana, the sister ship of the Atlanta, built by James Davidson, so right across the river here. And it was built for 3 names that you probably have heard of, at least Jennison you have, because we still have a Jennison building here. Wilbur Steele was huge in the Gladwin area, buying up timber, made a fortune doing that, and also went into Detroit. And Charles Eastman we'll talk about a little bit too, from the Saginaw Bay City area. Big into lumber dealing, but never had a yard. His family had a yard over by Carlton, but Eastman was more into the ships and kind of financing the ships. And unfortunately for Eastman, he had quite a few problems with ships that would sink. You're the first people to see this. This is the Atlanta on the bottom, and look at the scroll work that was done on this. These vessels that came out, remember Davidson was building things out of oak and basically getting to 250, 270 feet, and everybody says, oh, you can't build them bigger than that. He went to 300 feet. You know, there's 2 monsters out there right now, the Chieftain, the Matanzas is out there, vessels that were the largest in the world built out of oak. And everybody wondered how he did it, and it's the strengthening using steel is how he did it, and would go through and reinforce these vessels so that these wood vessels could work, you know, and do the type of work that he needed to do, and especially with Atlanta doing lumber and then going in, especially for these guys, salt, a lot of salt cargoes that came through, part of the agreement. I did a tour with my son to redo all of the Edmund Fitzgerald video, so we went all the way up into Minnesota, but we stopped off at Whitefish and spent almost a half hour kind of going over some of the stories, and this is some details on the Atlanta.
James Davidson's shipyard turned out what newspapers described as the world's largest wooden vessels, and while the Atlanta wasn't Davidson's biggest, it was 180 feet long and built with steel keelsons and a steel arch on her outside, capable of 850,000 feet of lumber or 45,000 bushels of corn. Her exact duplicate, Nirvana, was launched at Bay City just 2 weeks later, and both barges were being towed by the steamer Wilhelm when the Atlantic broke loose in a spring storm. It was in May of 1891 when the crew abandoned the Atlanta and rowed over 20 miles to shore. They were within feet of safety when the breakers tossed the boat over. Only 2 survived, rescued by the lifesavers at Crisp Point.
Unfortunately, Captain Knowlton's body was found almost 2 weeks later from Saginaw. The 2 survivors were 2 crewmen that were from Saginaw. So a lot of ties to the Saginaw area that were there. But the vessel itself, the Atlanta, was said to be in 200 feet of water. They were way off. It's in 600 feet of water, so it was definitely off. We talked a little bit about the Nirvana and the Galatea, or the Glade. Most people pronounce it Galatea, after the famous sculpture. If you remember in your mythology, a sculptor created the most beautiful statue of all and fell in love with it, and Aphrodite actually made the statue come alive for him. So that's the story of what Galatea was. Unfortunately, Galatea was not the most beautiful ship of all time by a long slide. And sadly, it had a very bad demise in the 1905 storm, as one of the big storms that came in. They had big storms in September. It sank a bunch of ships. In October came in, sank the Faye. If you've ever been up to the lighthouse at going by Rogers City, there's pieces of the shipwreck there. That's from this storm. The Mendoza, the largest Canadian schooner, went down. And of course, the Nirvana and the Galatea were actually pushed on shore at Grand Marais and destroyed there. So big stories, and everybody talked about it. There's also big problems that they had when the Midnight and the Mears crashed ashore. Totally unrelated, but all owned by Eastman. So Eastman had the Wilhelm, which was named for his business partner, Sidney Wilhelm, and in this big storm actually lost 2 ships and several lives that went down. And of course, they wanted to sue him to try to recover some of that money. So it's just one thing after another, from the Atlanta and going into the loss of the Midnight and the Mears. And then the Wilhelm itself ran aground too in Canada. They finally released that, and he sold it off. And then he kind of left here. He was engaged, and he left the Saginaw area for Detroit, and then went to Seattle and bought another 1 million feet of lumber, found 2 different spots, and so made his fortune back again, and then got sick. He got kidney problems, and wrote in a will to a lady that said, if I make it, if I don't make it through here, you can have 1/4 of my fortune, but the other 2/3 has to go, or the other 3 parts, yeah. 3 and 4. The 3 sisters that were still around from the Eastman family wanted a share of that as well. Here's another forward picture of the Atlanta. We don't have a lot of pictures, and I wish I had better video, but it was pretty bouncy from what Daryl was telling me. But look at the cabins intact on here too. So there's a lot to explore. Really excited to go back and take a closer look at this Bay City built ship. Here's the big storm that came in, and this is the Nirvana sitting on the dock, but it was pushed into the break wall at Grand Marais and unfortunately destroyed right there. The Galatea, they thought they could take off, and it became a tourist attraction. People would come out and see it up on the beach, and I've got great pictures on the beach I've done in my other lectures. But it eventually got buried, and they think it's buried in the sand up there now, so we don't know exactly where it went to, but this is what happened. See how it says Heinz boats are wrecked? These were bought out. The Galatea and the Nirvana actually were owned by Heinz Lumber. And believe it or not, this wasn't the worst incident for Heinz Lumber. They lost 4 ships in one storm. And of those ships that Daryl found this summer, we think we found 3 of the 4 ships that he lost. We know for sure we found the Curtis. The question is, 2 of the other vessels, the Annie Peterson, which would have been towed by it, was always said to have gone ashore, so nobody really looked for it. But we've got a target that's right around the size of that. And then, of course, the second schooner that was with them, also another big one that nobody's known where it is, should be in deep water pretty close to where it was. The story being that they actually went out, turned around, tried to go into Munising as well, made it into Munising. They watched him turn around with only 1 tow, so they thought the Peterson had been lost, and they went to go collect them up. Again, no first-person accounts. I don't know how true that story is, but if we find all 3 in the same area, we're going to know that that wasn't a good account, that they never went back to Munising at all. About the money going to the girlfriend that was in Saginaw, she eventually moved to Arizona, to Tucson, and a court case came up when that note finally came out. So Mr. Eastman came back to the sanitarium in Battle Creek, and unfortunately had a problem with Bright's disease, so he had cirrhosis of the liver and passed away. And all of a sudden they find this note, and it says, "Susie, dear, Dr. Peterlin tells me he's going to open my kidney." This is from the first surgery when he was in Seattle. "And put in a drainage tube. If anything should happen, 1/4 of my estate and my debts are paid. Love to you, from C.E. Eastman." I don't know what Gramp meant. Maybe that's I don't know, it's a weird name to put on there. But Susie Foley was found, and all the headlines around the country where she's going to get cash. Look at this, $100,000 coming to her, former Saginaw woman, rich hair. It went into the Supreme Court finally. The sisters were not going to have this lady getting a quarter of the fortune, and unfortunately for Susie, she never got a dime. So it went all to the sisters. One was living in Florida, one was living in Detroit, and the story, as they say, goes on from there. I'm sure it was put to good use, but that's all I've found from the notes and from what we found. I've got lots of stuff on the city of Bangor, and I hope that if you get a chance, you can go online to shipwreckpodcast.com. And on there, I've actually got a full hour of Fred Hardway, not only is talking about the shipwreck itself, but also going into Nichols Transportation's troubles that they had. There was a big legal dispute that came up, and he was in the middle of all of it too. So there's a neat story on there that kind of builds up. Nichols Dock is still down there. If you know, on the river, Nichols Transportation is right next to where the Fitzgerald was actually launched at River Rouge. So that Shipyard slip is one next to where the Fitzgerald was actually launched from. So shipwreckpodcast.com. If you love the Fitzgerald, I spent my summer and part of my fall doing a 4-hour podcast on the Fitzgerald. So every interview I've done, from the building of the ship all the way into the sailing of the ship and into especially the investigation. So the Coast Guard, I go heavily into the people who found it, which we've never talked about before. The ship was actually discovered by a Navy aircraft that came out of Chicago. They were submarine finders, and if you think about it, in 1975, the biggest target that they were used to finding would be a 500-foot Soviet submarine. Think about them looking for a 729-foot freighter loaded with iron ore that was scattered all across the bottom. So they had a little indicator that looked like a volume you get on a radio station board or whatever, that swings back and forth. And whenever they'd go over an anomaly, it would just kind of dip like this, and they'd know there was a target. And the guys told me on the plane, they flew over the Fitzgerald and wham! It was directly right there. They found it on the first pass, and it was no big deal. They came back around. They dropped a buoy from the plane, and the buoy sent smoke up, and then the Coast Guard cutter Woodrush, which was searching for the Fitzgerald, came back out and marked it with a buoy, but that buoy was broken off in a storm that night. So the Navy had to come back the next day and re-find it for the Coast Guard. So you can imagine there was some ribbing that went on with that as well. So if you want to hear the conversations of the crew that were on board both planes, and then goes into the Coast Guard investigation, including the environmental response. They were worried about the pollution coming off of the Fitz. So one of those guys, Brunk, was on board. And then I added in a ton of stuff from especially, Cousteau, all the people I've interviewed who've dove the wreck. And my favorite part was going through the 2 hours of underwater footage I had and pulling my audio out and listening to what I said when I was down there, because you just don't remember that. But the gift that I get as a videographer is that I can replay this. So when I go on an adventure on an airplane, or if I go on a dive and I bring my camera, that means all of you get to go along with me. So that's my favorite part, is going back, looking and listening, and finding the most important parts that I thought. And it turns out we actually found hatches 2 and 3 that I don't think anybody had talked about before. And by listening to it, I actually was learning more stuff about the Fitzgerald. So shipwreckpodcast.com, or of course lakefury.com. For those of you who were at my lecture before, my brand new book is called Bottled Goodbyes. It's all about messages in a bottle that were found not only on the Great Lakes, but also Titanic and several other ocean wrecks. And I even go into the history of radio, because that's why we stopped putting messages in a bottle, when you can just pick up the radio and go, help. So they don't need a message in a bottle. I have copies of that here. There's some at the gift shop, and I encourage you to make sure you support the gift shop and the museum here. Obviously, COVID's been difficult on all of us, and some people have really endured horrible things with losses. But the museums and the libraries and stuff, it's just been devastating. Show them love, show them support. Make sure that you utilize these things, because now is the time people start looking at these museums and saying, oh, maybe that's not something we need anymore. And we joke about that, but I remember at a time when this museum was within 200 votes of closing down. So the truth is, as long as people just drive by here and don't look in here, that's a real possibility. And to have everything on the internet is not possible. We will never have a single source of all the information from Wheeler Shipyard on one library, you know, one server someplace. It's going to be in a place like this. It's going to be in our museums. It's going to be from amazing, you know, groups like the River Society. You know, these are the people that have spent their lives gathering this stuff. And if we don't go out to the lighthouse, if we don't go out to Spectacle Reef, you'll hear about next Saturday. I spent a weekend out there. This is one of the most remote lighthouses on the Great Lakes. And Spectacle Reef was so important with the design on how it was built. Every other lighthouse would have been pushed into the lake if it wasn't for the design that they had, mostly from Minot's Ledge and a couple other places, but these interlocking blocks that Orlando Poe came up with, mined out of the mines in Ohio and brought out there and put on these remote rocks where the reef that was tearing the bottoms out of ships almost daily. I mean, they literally, the Spectacle Reef was a deadly spot on the lake, and this lighthouse was critical. So make sure you support these groups, make sure you support the libraries. They need it now more than ever. And if you have any questions about what we've talked about, I could handle those right now. Yes?
I would like to find out what initially sparked your interest in going after knowledge on the shipwreck.
It was a shipwreck in Bay City. How many people remember 1990 when the sky was filled with black smoke and we lost a sailor on the Jupiter? I was in Saginaw. I was a part of the weekend crew. And as soon as my pager went off, it only took running to my news car for TV5, and I look out and here's a plume of smoke I can see from Bay City. You know, I'm in Saginaw. I was in Carlton then, and I said, something's up. So I came up here. I didn't get to go on the plane to catch the aerials. I didn't get to go to the riverfront. Mike Avery was on the bridge. Jay Brando was on the bridge. They were getting full scenes. I was back over behind the Standard Oil, and I was doing the live shots with Angie Miles, but I could hear the explosions. And then when we went to go get something to eat at Papa Tony's after the fire was out and it rekindled, instantly it became, what is this ship? This is the largest tanker ever lost. I had to learn more. And we went into the newsroom after our coverage, and Larry Elliott from Channel 12 had gotten in a boat and with the state police, and he had gotten these amazing views from and my boss is steaming, going, why don't we have this? And I said, well, Larry's a diver with the Genesee County dive team. He goes, well, why aren't you a diver? I said, because you haven't paid for it. He goes, well, let's fix that. So after about a paperwork this thick of, I won't sue you if I die when I drown, which is ridiculous. The dives that I do are so, you know, tame compared to the flying that I do. I mean, in the biplanes and stuff, the diving is about as safe as I do. In fact, with the mileage that I do in the TV news car and stuff, the most dangerous thing I ever did at TV5 wasn't bungee jumping off the crane over here or jumping out of an airplane at 12,500 feet. It was driving in those news cars. You know, that was where I was really going to get, you know, in danger. So those shipwrecks, I got to walk the melted deck of the Jupiter when they were scrapping it. And I was just fixed. I'm like, this is crazy. So I took dive training. I went up to Alpena. I borrowed a camera from the dive shop in Midland. And I won 4 awards from the state on Michigan Association of Broadcasting. And I thought, this is amazing. I mean, this is a world that nobody was really doing in video. We had great books, but nobody was doing anything in television stories. So for me, it became, why don't I use my TV experience to get the interviews from the survivors that no one else has done? No one had ever talked to Dennis Hale. Nobody had talked to Frank Mays. So I started to collect that stuff, and that became a 30-year quest for me to collect all this stuff, to build it, and to become, you know, not really an expert, but just somebody that just loves doing it. And I'm amongst people here that know that passion, because there's people here who know more about Bay City shipping than I'll ever know. You know, the truth is you can't know everything, and you got to pick the storms and the stories that are the most interesting. For when they find things on the bottom like this, then I become interested, and I'll do more deep diving into what they are, because that's, you know, the video that we have. For the people who just say, I'm going to write something on this and dig it up, that's a lot more difficult, I think. But that's how I got started, and I'm not going to slow down, and I'm excited when I see young people in the audience that, you know, will pick up that torch, hopefully, and see that this is amazing history that's out there. We don't have a lot of the people, unfortunately, that are eyewitnesses to, say, the 40 storm or the 1913 storm. I lucked out that my timing was perfect to find people from there, and now to even find interviews from the 1930s and stuff with the new technology of search engines and how we actually search. Imagine we used to have to go through newspapers, page after page after page, staring at the microfiche machine. Now I can sit in my PJs and type in bottled message, and the computer just goes boom, 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 5 million hits from England to, you know, Yugoslavia, and I'm getting all this stuff right there, drinking my coffee, going, yeah, this is tough. So there's never been a better time to look for the history now. There's never been a better time to search for the ships out there with the technology that's so inexpensive comparatively. Side scan used to be $90,000. You know, I mean, at one point, you couldn't even buy the paper for this. It had to be kept in a refrigerator. Now, fish finders, we go over the top of it and we can tell you what ship it is. Oh, look, there's 4 masts on there, and you practically see the name on it. You know, the detail is so good. So, yeah, so it's exciting times, and I hope other people will pick up the torch and carry, because there's 5,000 more shipwrecks to find. So there's still a lot more stories to tell. Who's calling me at this time? Go ahead.
You mentioned the Chrysler 50 is in a museum.
Yep.
What museum?
Copper Harbor, is that Rock Harbor? Rock? Help me out, who's my lighthouse geniuses up there? There's 3 lighthouses up there. Rock Harbor. That's going to be a hard one for me to remember. But yeah, if you go up into Copper Harbor and then come back down, the city of the river that goes in there. Where's my Yoopers at?
Eagle River.
Eagle River Lighthouse. North of there is Rock Harbor Lighthouse. Eagle Harbor, thank you. Eagle Harbor Lighthouse has a full museum. They've got anchors out front, and then if you go into Eagle River, you can actually see the pilot house of the Tioga is still there. The wreck of the Moreland is out there too, so there's a lot of neat things that are up there. But yeah, the car is still up there, you can see it. There is a mark in the top of the door that looks like it was chopped. I don't think it is, but somebody could have put the wrong Venco number on there too, Fedco number, so you never know. Maybe one more? Ah, yes.
Did you dive for the missing cars?
We did. We went out, we did some scans, and we looked at some targets, and there were 2 that looked like they were good, and turned out to be a rock. You know, we wanted to get something that was close, but we thought it might be rounded off. So we finished our time and went into the Hecla had a big mining operation up there, copper, and if you go down, there was 2 big dredges, and we ended up doing some more work on those. And then I dove into the actual channel that's right at Michigan Tech, and I dove on a little steamer, a tiny tug that was there, but the visibility was so bad, I was like, boom, hit my face into the wreck, trying to get pictures. It was just murky like coffee. So unfortunately, the dive conditions weren't great there. We do want to do some more, and I hope to get back up there, because the sandstone that came out of that area is amazing, and it's been used in so many buildings. If you look at Marquette or Calumet, the red buildings that are there, these are all designed out of this sandstone that came out of these quarries up there, and that's a whole nother story. So I'm hoping to do some more on that and do some dives up there. And there's 2 more wrecks that, even at Whitefish, that has blocks supposedly from Keweenaw as well. Yes, sir.
When's the deepest you've ever put the robot?
We've gone to, well, I think this probably challenged it. We were at 650. I think that's as deep as we brought it down, and we just got funding. They had a fantastic year at the museum, and we paid off a huge loan, and we bought another robot. So we're going to get another smaller one that hopefully now we can go down and a little easier. We need 4 people to do that robot, and when you have 600 feet of cable out, guess who has to roll that back up? So we did it, we put it down there, and all of a sudden, nope, it's not there. Roll it back up. Bring it back out, put it back down again. Oh, we're on the wrong side. Roll it back up, because you don't know where you're at, because you can get close, but when you put the anchor down, you don't want to hit the wreck with the anchor. So you got to go away from it a little bit, and it's a bear to get on there. So yeah, the littler robot will be nice, and there's probably 4 more wrecks that we'd like to check with that little robot first. So I'm hoping we'll be online. And I said, sign me up for classes, because boy, would that be cool to learn how to fly it. Maybe.
And if you get like a really big ship instead of towards like the middle of like the north or somewhere around that, and be at rank and get like a 3,000 foot people, you could actually put the robot so deep it could find the Titanic.
Could you imagine that? What's the deepest that Lake Superior is? Do you know?
Some more than 100.
Yep, it's 1,200 feet deep. Yep, and it's up by the Keweenaw Peninsula. So everything that we're looking at is probably between 900 feet and probably more like 600 feet. And we're looking for the Western Reserve that should be up there. Looking for the Sauber that could be up there. There's a couple that are up there, and the Minesweepers. And of course, the what's the big mystery one? What's the one that the author from Owasso wrote all those stories about? Dang nabbit, the ghost ship, Bannockburn. The mighty Bannockburn is this ship that sank in a storm, and it would have been just like any other ship, like even Fitzgerald, really. But if you look at the writings that were done by Curwood, Curwood did a story, and he wrote the Bannockburn's Widows, and he talked this fanciful story about how the widow came down and found 2 survivors from this vessel. Nobody survived the Bannockburn when it went down. It's off of Standard Rock someplace, the most remote lighthouse in the U.S., and nobody knows where it's at. So Curwood then wrote a big story in it and called it The Ice Devils Sank It, and it became this huge legend where some ships even said they saw the Bannockburn's ghost as it went by. You know, a lot of fanciful stories, but that ship is up there too. So now hopefully we'll run into one of those, but I don't mind if we just find little schooners. I mean, as long as it's got a story and a name that we can find or a measurement that we can find, it's totally worth coming up and telling you guys about it. Thank you again for your support of the museum. I appreciate seeing everybody, and be well.